Hey there, I'm Colin Gray and I'm going to take you through how to start a podcast. Every single step you need. Let's get podcasting. Thanks for joining me here. And the aim of this video is to get you podcasting in the shortest possible time. So I'm going to go through every single step you need to go through to get a podcast planned, recorded, edited, and out into the world. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with every single little detail. I'm just going to give you just enough, everything you need to get started, and I'll point you towards lots of other resources where you can do your further learning if you want to go deeper in any particular area. We'll pop into them throughout this video. So, number one, the first step is, why are you running a podcast? So it's worthwhile knowing, is it for a business? Is it a hobby? What do you want to get out of this? What is your aim for the podcast? It's a really good motivator to know what your aim is for that first 10 episodes, for example. Are you aiming to get 100 listeners? Are you aiming to get 10 new subscribers on your email list? Are you aiming to sell a couple of products? Or are you just aiming to get feedback from 10 people on those first 10 episodes? Write that stuff down. It's a real motivator to keep you going when the planning, when the editing, the production gets tough. Number two is, who is your podcast for? Now, this is something that people often think they know off by heart, but it's worth thinking about this. Who is your ideal listener, your podcast avatar? Who is the person that's going to come and listen and be the perfect listener to your show? It really is worthwhile sort of sketching this person out, okay? You might know somebody who fits that ideal listener role, maybe a client, maybe a friend, maybe somebody that does your hobby with you. Maybe it's them, that'd be fine. But you might need to make somebody up as well. It might be that you actually sort of make a background, make jobs, hobbies, all this kind of stuff. You give them a name. The idea is that your avatar is the person you are speaking to every time you pick up the mic. And trust me, it makes it so much easier to create your content, to speak into this microphone with confidence, with enthusiasm, with engagement. If you have in your head that podcast avatar or that real person. So this is really worthwhile spending a bit of time on. Okay, number three, and this is the last of the planning, don't worry, we'll get into the actual what to do next. But the big thing here is, once you know your audience, once you know why you're doing the podcast, it's giving them a reason to listen. Now for me, this is two things. It's a problem-solution pair, okay? You need to know the problem that your audience is experiencing. What pain do they have? What struggles are they experiencing? And how are you going to solve them? Okay, that all goes into the title of your show. It goes into the description of your show. It goes into the introduction on the episode every single time. That's what persuades them to go, oh, that show's definitely for me. Hit subscribe and listen. And it persuades them to come back every single episode. If you don't think this through, people are just going to go, I don't know, I'm not sure what that show's about. I'm not sure how it'll help me, because people are selfish and they won't hit subscribe. They won't listen. So it's key to growing a show. Number four is naming your podcast. Okay, this is when it gets practical. We have to give it a name. Now, this is a proper black hole for a lot of people. It's where a lot of people waste a lot of time. Now, there's three ways to do it. You can go the obvious route, the Ron seal that does what it says in the tin. It just is like, so if it's a marketing podcast, you do the digital marketing podcast, or the mountain biking podcast, or the space exploration podcast. You know, it just does what it says in the tin. It's obvious. In most cases, I'm afraid to say it's boring, but that is the best option, okay? You have very limited time in the directories. People are scrolling past tons of different podcasts. They're looking at the artwork, they're looking at the title, and often they decide just on that. If you go with a clever name, they'll maybe skip right by it because they won't get that the podcast is for them. They won't get that it's about a topic that really interests them. So it needs to be obvious. You can put in something that's a little bit clever, a little bit personality based, but make sure that goes alongside the obvious part. You make it obvious, but you add a bit of personality as well, okay? But that is key. Don't spend too much time on this. Make it obvious, make it boring. Put in a little bit of personality if you can, but try and not spend too much time on this and get moving. You can always change your name later. Many podcasts do, so don't feel like it's a decision forever. Number five, how long should your episodes be? So one of the most common questions we get. Now, length is completely personal, okay? I often just say it should be as long as it needs to be, or as short as it can be, but no shorter, okay? So I would say you want to keep it as short as you can. So if you can cover a topic in 10 minutes, do it in 10 minutes. If you can cover it in 5, do it in 5. But people do expect a semi-regular length. So pick a time that you think suits the topic. Let's say 15 minutes. You're often going to aim for 15 minutes, but it could be anything between 10 and 20. And it could go longer every now and again. It could go shorter every now and again. But as long as that average is around the length that you choose, then that is fine. The key is that it needs to be sustainable, okay? It needs to be a length that you can commit to every single week or every single day or every single month, whatever frequency, and we'll get to that next. But length is entirely personal and it suits the topic itself, okay? An average kind of length, if you really want a rule of thumb, is something in the region of 20 to 30 minutes. That tends to be a normal kind of length. But really, you can do anything. Go short, that can make you stand out. Go super long and go in depth, that can make you stand out. This is entirely up to you. Number 6, how often should I release my episodes? I mentioned that frequency, how often? The total bog standard is weekly. Weekly routines are how we work as human beings. We expect the same thing to happen every Monday morning, every Thursday afternoon. You know, it's kind of built into the way we work because of our working week. So weekly is a good frequency, but weekly is only feasible if you can commit to that. So there's no point in doing a weekly show for 6 weeks and then actually you get burned out because it's too much to fit into your weekly routine and then you stop. Better to do a fortnightly show once every 2 weeks and keep that going forever, okay? So frequency is a lot down to consistency and the time that you have available. I mean, if you can commit to a 5-minute daily show every single day, arguably that could grow your show faster. It tends to be the more frequent you go, the faster you will grow because you're attracting new listeners with every episode. You're building that habit of listening. So the key rule really is go as frequent as you can, up to weekly, but only if you can commit to that long term. And actually only go more frequent than weekly, go daily if you have a really good reason for it, because actually it can kind of overwhelm listeners if you're going daily. It can almost be too much for people. So that's about frequency. Go as frequent as you can while keeping it sustainable. Tying in frequency, though, is the idea of seasons. The idea of doing a series of, say, 8 or 12 episodes, like 2 or 3 months, and then taking a month break. And that can be a nice way to be frequent, so every single week for 12 weeks, but then get to take a month or 2 months off and refresh and get to do something else for a little while. So seasons are a really good way to keep your frequency up without overwhelming yourself. And I've got a good article on seasons on the site. If you go over to thepodcasthost.com/seasons, you'll pop right onto that. Number 7 is episode titles. So this is the last bit of the planning, really the sort of practical element of the planning. Episode titles, you can be found in the directories by episode. So your episodes should be as descriptive as they possibly can be. They should tell the listener what problem you're solving in that episode, okay? Lead with the benefits. Right at the start of the episode title is the benefits. What are they going to get from this? How is it going to help them, all right? Don't tend to put, interviewee names unless it's somebody super famous. It's going to attract them on their own right. But people often put interviewee names at the start, but put them at the end instead. Benefits first, then interviewee names. And new iTunes regulations, don't put in your numbers. Don't put in episode numbers into your episode titles. That's actually taken care of by the players themselves. They'll tend to put the numbers in for you. Okay, number 8, the last one before we get recording, is choosing what it's actually going to sound like, the podcast format. What format are you going to follow? So we've got a few most common ones. First of which is co-hosting. So 2 people, me, somebody else on the other side of the table, chatting to each other. Really good format because it's quite conversational. You get a lot of chemistry between 2 people. Because it's the same people on every single episode, the listener gets to know both of them, the chemistry between them, the relationship between them. It can be a really nice format that works very well. And because it's the same 2 people every time, you've got good control over what goes into that episode. You can plan it out well between you. The other common one with 2 people, though, is interviews. So you can interview people, get somebody new on every single episode, interview them, get content from them. Upsides of interviews are that you can get a lot more voices in your show, a lot more information. You don't need to talk about stuff that you know. You get other experts on your show. Downsides are, it takes a lot of work actually to organise interviews every single week, finding new interviewees every single week. And you're giving up a bit of control over what goes into your show as well. The interviewee controls it a little bit. You know, they're the ones that are providing the content. So you're giving up a bit of control. You're even giving up a bit of authority because you're getting these other people on and talking about the topics. So ups and downs to interviews. So choose carefully. The final one is solo. Actually, just recording by yourself, just like I'm doing here. You can talk into the mic for 5 or 10 minutes. The upside of that is it's so easy to plan. You've got full control. You just write out some bullet points. You just speak for 10 minutes. There's no coordinating schedules, booking in your co-host or your interviewee. You've got full control over exactly what goes into that show. So there's definite upsides to doing solo. And to finish up, you can mix it up. So you could do, say, 3 interview shows and 1 solo show every month. Mix it up so that you're doing a few different things. Absolutely no problem with that. If you have a standard average format that you tend to do more often than not, that's good, but then mix in the other types as and when you feel like it. Step 9, time to start recording. How do you choose your gear? So this is all about equipment. So a couple of options here. First one is just a simple USB mic, all right? That is usually the best option for most people. If you're co-hosting with somebody online, you're doing online calls, or you're doing interviews, you're talking into a computer, you're recording a call, which is an interview with somebody else, or you're doing solo recording like this. All you need is one decent microphone to plug into your computer, and that'll suit all of those contexts, okay? Now, good recommendations are the Samson Q2U, okay? If you go over to thepodcasthost.com/Samson Q2U or just /Q2U, you'll find a review of that. You can see more about that mic. Great little handheld mic. It does really well, good quality, and you don't even need a decent stand. It comes with a stand as well. An upgrade to that would be the Rode Podcaster. So the Rode Podcaster, really nice mic, just like this one here. This is the Rode Procaster, but the Podcaster is the USB version. Plugs right into your computer, really pro quality. Needs a stand like this though, so the Rode PSA-1 stand, and then you've got a really pro setup. If you want more info on those, pop over to thepodcasthost.com/start and then scroll down to section 9 and that'll show you all of the equipment we recommend. There are a few other setups, so you can go with more pro recorders like the Zoom H5, the Zoom H6, if you need to record a few people in the same place, some handheld mics like the Shure SM58. You can get information on all of that though if you go to thepodcasthost.com/start and scroll down to section 9. Next, we've got step 11, which is software. So this is often the same. So you often use the same software for recording and editing, for example, but you might not. So here's a couple of options. The free one is Audacity. So Audacity, again, go over to thepodcasthost.com/start, scroll down to section 10, and you'll see all of the links here so you can find them all really easily. But Audacity is a free audio editing package, which lets you do editing, production, processing, all that stuff. It's a bit clunky, it's a bit old-fashioned, it's not the easiest thing in the world to use, but it does the job just fine and it's free. So it's a good option for many people. If you want a sort of professional editing package, then we use Audition, for example, Adobe Audition in the studio here. Now, it costs about $25, $30 a month, so it's not very cheap, but workflows are better, much nicer to use, much more power, much more options and presets in there, so it makes your life a bit easier for editing. Now, another option for recording and editing is our software Alitu. So alitu.com, alitu.com. It allows solo recording just now, possibly adding in other types of recording in the very near future, and you can do all of your editing in Alitu as well. Plus it automates all of the processing, so it does all of the audio cleanup, it adds in your music automatically, it pieces all the different bits together automatically, and it publishes it automatically as well. So alitu.com is another option for recording and editing. And then finally, many people actually record just using call recording software. So you've got things like recording a Skype call with Ecamm Call Recorder, or just using Zoom. Zoom.us is a teleconferencing piece of software, and it can record the calls as well. And there's even double ender tools as well, where you actually record full quality on both ends. Okay, they cost a bit more. So Zoom.us, for example, is free to record a Skype call usually. But with something like the double ender tools like Squadcast or Zencaster, then you pay something maybe $10 to $20 per month. Again, for full links for all of these options, go over to thepodcasthost.com/start, and you'll see them all in section 10. Part 11, now that you've got your gear set up, it's time to script out your show. Few options here. So I see people generally working from option 1 up to option 3. Now option 1 is a word for word script. So you actually just literally type out every single word you're going to say, and then you sit there and you read it. Or at least you use it as a guide, okay? It's good for building confidence. It's fine in the early days, but you want to try and move away from that because it doesn't sound terribly engaging when you're reading a script, okay, unless you're very good at reading it. Option 2 then is detailed bullet points. So actually you end up just writing out a bullet point list of the kind of main points you want to cover on the episode. And then you add a little bit of detail to each one. So say there's 5 top levels, you go into each one and you add a few sentences to each one, just to give you a guide, gives you more of a confidence booster. You're never going to run out of something to say. You know exactly what you need to say, covers all the points in there. Option 3, where you'll get to with a bit more practice and with topics you know really well, is just the top level bullets, okay? So just say you've got 5 bullets in front of you and you just read through all 5 as you go. They're just basically a guide. You know the subject, but you need this guide in front of you just to give you an order. Make sure you don't miss out a large part of it, or just to give you a little bit of a sequence to follow through. Step 12 is talking into the mic. So there's a few things around this, how you talk into a mic, how you get confident. The first thing I'll say is that a lot of people hate this part in the early days because they hate their voice. There's not much to do about this apart from just to be told your own voice is your own voice. Somebody will love your voice. You'll find an audience that likes your voice no matter how you sound. And do you know what? The more you speak into a mic, the more confident you sound, the more practiced you sound, and your voice does improve over time with practice. So it's just really about gaining that confidence and realizing that everyone sounds a bit different when you listen back to your own voice, okay? The other part of it is knowing your persona. So we talked about knowing your audience earlier. It's really important to know your audience because that's where your voice comes out. If you know who you're talking to, you've got the picture in your head of that person, that ideal listener. You're talking to them. You're not talking to a mic. You're not talking to the recorder. You're not talking to anything like that. You're talking to that person to person. And that can take away a bit of the anxiety around it. Some people actually put a little, a teddy bear behind the microphone or a photo behind the microphone. And it's this personality that they can then speak to. There's this thing that you can speak to as opposed to, well, actually, no, it's more, it's a person you can speak to as opposed to the tech. Okay. We do have a course around this. So if you did fancy joining our academy over at thepodcasthost.com/academy, this is one of our most popular courses, which is called Voice Training for Podcasters. And it goes into all the different ways you can warm up your voice, gain more confidence, really sort of technical skills around speaking into the mic, getting better at that and developing your voice as a tool. It's the most important thing we've got as podcasters is our voice. So it's worth learning. So you can get that over at thepodcasthost.com/academy. It's one of the courses that you get in there for free. Now, the last thing I'll say here is one thing worth noting is how far away you need to be from your mic. The biggest thing about mic technique is distance. And we use the hang 10 sign. So put it against your mic, put it against your mouth, and try and keep about that distance away from the mic. Don't feel stilted. You still want to be able to move around a little bit, but you always want to be in that kind of region around the mic. Step 13 is remote co-host, remote guest. How do you record that remote call? Now, I did cover this a little bit earlier on in the software and editing section, but full listing is over at thepodcasthost.com/start and go to section 13. That's all about recording remote guests. Again, the options are really, you're going to be recording either a Skype call or a Zoom US call. If you're using Zoom.us, free for 2 people, up to, in fact, infinite time. Free for more than 2 people, up to 45 minutes. So it's a good option. Quality is subject to, call quality, to your connection quality. So you do get call glitches in there. And that's the same with Skype as well. When recording Skype, you can record a Skype call with Skype itself these days. It has an internal recording tool, but you also get a tool called Ecamm Call Recorder for the Mac, and you get one called Talk Helper for the PC. Both of them can record a Skype call. Skype is decent because just about everybody has it. Just about everybody has access to it, so it's a decent option. Finally, you do get those double-ender tools. Just to explain that a bit more, a double-ender means you're recording on both ends, the double-ended recording. So I'm recording directly on my computer, they're recording directly on their computer, and you bring the two parts together afterwards. So it means that there's no issues with call quality. You know, you're not recording through the internet, you're speaking through the internet, but you're both recording separately. And these tools make it super easy to bring them back together. So they actually join it together for you and give you the final file. So they're good tools. Again, go over to thepodcasthost.com/start and you'll get full info on all of those options. Step 14 is editing your podcast. So we talked about software earlier on. You can use something like Audacity or Audition to edit your podcast. Great tools. You get loads of detail. If you're editing out tons of stuff like ums and ahs, and you're adding in loads of different clips, making tons of edits, you want to go with a piece of software like that for the precision that it offers. If you want to make it easy, you can use, again, alitu.com, alitu.com. Does a lot of the processing, the cleanup for you, and helps with the editing. There are a few other editing options out there, a few other packages, but very much same pros and cons for most of them. There's a bit of a steep learning curve to learn any kind of DAW, you call it a digital audio workstation, but you get a lot of power at the end of it. So it's up to you whether you want to spend a lot of time learning and then have all the control at the end, or whether actually you want to just use a quick and easy process like something like Alitu. We have a course, if you do want to learn Audacity, we have a full course on Audacities, and it applies to pretty much any digital audio workstation too. So it teaches you everything like EQ, like cutting, like volumes, like mixing, all that stuff. And that's inside our academy. So that's inside thepodcasthost.com/academy if you were interested. Step 15, we're getting into the branding now. So how's the show going to sound? And this is music. So where do you get music for your podcast? Quick first point is you don't need music. In the early days, feel free to skip out music altogether because it's an extra addition. I mean, you can add it in Audacity and Audition. Alitu adds music automatically. And in fact, we've got a free music library in Alitu to use to produce your podcast too. But by all means, you do not need it. It's a complication in the early days that is it's polish. It's icing on the cake. But if you do want to go with music, then there's a few different options. Free is difficult. Music's quite hard to make. Not many people give it away for free. There's a resource called Incompetech, and you can again get links to this from thepodcasthost.com/start. Go to section 15. You'll find links to all of these. But the first one is Incompetech. They've got a few free tracks. They're very overused, I'm afraid, because they're free and it's one of the only sources of free stuff. So you do hear them around a lot. So you're not going to be unique if you use them, but it doesn't cost anything. But for even a little bit of money, if you're willing to pay even just $14.99 a month, you can use a resource called Audio Blocks. So Audio Blocks is a huge royalty-free music library, which has tons of stuff in there to pick from, and it's a membership. You join for a month for $14, $14.99 I think it is, and then you can choose as many tracks as you want. And even if you leave Audio Blocks, so even if you only sign up for the month, download a few tracks, you can use those tracks forever. So you get the license forever from then on. So it's a really good option, not very high cost, to get some good music for your show. Step 16 is your podcast artwork. Podcast cover art. So this is the image that goes on the front of your podcast. It's like that CD cover from the olden days. Now, these are very subjective, but I'll give you a couple of guidelines on cover art. First of all is keep it really simple. A lot of people try and fit too much into their podcast artwork because it feels big when you're creating it. You actually, the specs are you create it 3000 by 3000 pixels. It's got to be under 500k in a JPEG or a PNG, but that's a big image. That's because in very rare cases, Apple Podcasts, the iTunes Store, and some other directories will show it big, but very rarely. Most of the time people see it really small in amongst loads of other logos. So that's why we need to keep it simple. We need to keep it simple and bold and super clear, okay? You need people to see it, even if it's only 200 or 300 pixels wide. It's quite small on the screen amongst 20 other ones. You need it to stand out. And the way I usually feel they stand out is decent, bright colours, nice and bold, with very bold text with the title in it. And here's going back to the title of your podcast being really obvious. They see this block, nice coloured bit of artwork with the title of the show. They need to see that title. It needs to attract their attention first. Then they see the title, they go, oh, I know exactly what that show's about right away. And then they click on it. So that's what the artwork's for. It's kind of the first impression of your show. So it doesn't need to be complicated. In many cases, you can make it yourself. So a tool like Canva, for example, canva.com, for example, you can create artwork in there with really nice designs, even if you're not a designer. So that's a good option to go with at the start. If you have a designer to make a really pro one, this is a place where it's actually worth a wee bit of extra money, a wee bit of extra time to make something really slick looking, just because it's that first impression again. And we do have a cover art service, actually, where we can help people make them. So if you're interested in that, pop over to thepodcasthost.com/start, scroll down to section 16, and you'll see a link to it in there. And in there as well, you'll see all the specs. So if you want to just check the dimensions, the types, the file sizes, that kind of stuff, it's all in that section on the Start article. One of the last sections of starting your podcast, number 17, publishing. Now, this is one of the biggest questions. Where do I publish and distribute my podcast? So for this, you need a podcast host, okay? A podcast host is a service that basically holds your audio files. You upload your audio files to them. They then create what's called an RSS feed. And that RSS feed is how people subscribe to your show. You don't need to know anything about RSS feeds. All you need to know is the podcast host creates it for you. And then that is what you give to the directories. Okay, so sign up for a good host. Our recommendations these days, we've got three sort of top recommendations right now. For the simplest, the most low cost, but still good option, you've got Buzzsprout, BUZZSPROUT. You can get that over at thepodcasthost.com/Buzzsprout if you want to visit them. $12 a month, and they get you good hosting, and it'll do the job just perfectly. Another option is Captivate.fm. Now they're a bit more, $19, not too much more, but they offer the option to have more than one podcast. So with Buzzsprout, you can only have one for that $12, but Captivate, you can start a few different shows in the same account. And Captivate have some extra options around growth. So they have a few different growth tools that help you grow your audience a bit more quickly. The final one I'll mention is Transistor.fm. So Transistor.fm, the sort of unique thing about them is they're about the same price as Captivate. They offer multiple shows as well, but they do private podcast feeds. Now, this is an interesting one because it means that you can start a show for, your company and distribute it to your staff. It's just a staff update. It's not for public. Or maybe it's creating a private feed that people pay for. You've got a public podcast, which grows your fans, and then a private podcast, which people pay for and subscribe to. And that's how you earn money through your show. And there's all sorts of other ways you can use private feeds as well. So you can get them over at Transistor.fm. Again, you can get links to these places at thepodcasthost.com/start. And if you don't mind using our affiliate links, we get a little bit of commission. It doesn't cost you any extra. In fact, you usually get a better deal if you go through us, maybe a free month or a gift token with Buzzsprout, for example. You get them at thepodcasthost.com/captivate, thepodcasthost.com/transistor, or thepodcasthost.com/buzzsprout. The second part of the hosting puzzle, though, is distribution. Where do you put the show after you've published it to your host? So this is when the directories come in. So the famous names like Apple Podcasts, iTunes, they're the same thing really. iTunes is the old name for Apple Podcasts. You've got Google Podcasts, you've got Spotify, you've got TuneIn, you've got Stitcher, you've got a few other ones. Okay, so how does this all work? Basically, what you want to do is find a host that helps you with all of this. It gives you the best options. Now, all of Buzzsprout, Captivate, and Transistor handle a lot of the distribution for you, or at least point you towards the right place. Okay, so to submit to Apple Podcasts, for example, you'll get a link to that from every single one of the hosts. You'll go to the Apple Podcasts portal, which is over at podcasts.apple.com. You can get a link to that in thepodcasthost.com/ Start as well. And then you'll submit your podcast there. Now, Apple take a little bit, they do a manual process, so they're a bit of a pain. They take about 5 days sometimes to validate your podcast. But it's worth getting it in there because every iOS user has Apple Podcasts as an app on their phone. And so it's a great distribution play with Apple Podcasts. The other one is Spotify. Spotify is growing fast as a distribution platform, and you can submit to Spotify automatically with all of the 3 hosts that I've listed. Just press a button and you'll be submitted to the Spotify directory, so well worth doing that. And the other ones that I often recommend, Google Podcasts is a funny one because as long as your show is out there in the world, as long as it's on a website that can be found, and your podcast hosting platform should handle this, they'll provide you with a website to show off all your episodes, or you can put it on your own website. For directions on that, by the way, go to thepodcasthost.com/website. That'll show you how to set up your own website or to change your existing website a little bit to make it accommodate your podcast, okay? But that's a whole different process. But anyway, once you've got that website out, Google Podcasts will find it just like Google does with every other resource on the web, and it'll list it within the Google Podcast directory. The final ones I'll mention are TuneIn. So TuneIn is worth submitting to just for the fact that it is, most smart speakers are linked up to TuneIn. So you can play your podcast through a smart speaker on TuneIn. But then again, you can do that with Spotify too, so that's becoming less important. And the final one is Stitcher. Stitcher is an app that's still popular enough, still worthwhile. It's an easy enough process to submit, but if you go over to stitcher.com, you can get your podcast in there too. Now, if you want full detail on that, obviously go to thepodcasthost.com/start, scroll down to section 17, and you'll find all the details on where to submit your podcast and how to go about it. Just a final note on the question, what website do you publish your podcast on? The 2 options there that I mentioned are obviously the website you get with your hosting platform, and you have your own website, something that you own separately. Now, you can use either, okay? The basic principle is you could use your podcast hosting website in the early days. It's not much flexibility. So say you use the Buzzsprout website or the Captivate website or the Transistor website. They show off the website, they show off the episodes. You get your show notes on there, you get a player, but not much else. You don't have that much control over that website. So it's really easy, it's maintained for you, but the downsides are you don't have much option there in terms of your visitors coming and visiting, putting on email lists, putting on different products, making a blog, that kind of stuff. So that's when, if you're trying to grow your podcast, take it seriously, have all sorts of growth tools, offer your listeners a lot more on the website, you'll create your own website itself. Now, a most common way to do this is with WordPress. And I've got a free guide on our website. If you go over to thepodcasthost.com/website, you'll get that full guide. It'll show you how to set up a WordPress website, how to set up the hosting, how to set up the podcast on that website so that you have your own site with your own domain, a real brand builder there if you have your own place. And last step 18 is the next step. So where do you go next? That's all you need to publish your show. What are the next steps? So there's a few things I'll point out here. First of all, if you do need any more information on this, if you do need any more help with this, we have our Podcast Host Academy. It includes live Q&A sessions every single week. So if you pop in there, you can jump in, you can ask me, Matthew, the rest of the team, any questions you have. So we can help you through this whole process. If you go over to thepodcasthost.com/academy, you'll find it all there. And inside the Academy too are our full range of courses, of course. We've got a launch course which shows you exactly how to do every part of this, videos and all, text guides to every single part of it. And then beyond that, the next steps, of course, are growth. So we have a growth course in there showing you how to grow your audience over your first year. We have a monetization course, how to earn some money out of your podcast by the end of that first year as well. And lots of other courses like the Audacity course, teaching you how to edit, or the voice coaching course, teaching you how to improve your speaking and your presenting skills. So do check out the Academy if you fancy it. And by all means, send me any questions you have about it over on Twitter or comments on this video below as well. On Twitter, I am the podcast host. A final option I'll mention is that we do work one-to-one with some people with some projects. So if you do want a launch package from us, you can go over to thepodcasthost.com/launch and you'll see full details of how that works there. And just in case you're only in this for the gear, I know plenty of people that follow our stuff are just in it for the equipment, the shiny stuff. If you go over and you're just really interested in looking at all of the gear we've reviewed, all the different equipment setups, the different things that you can buy, the software, the editing, all that stuff as well, go over to thepodcasthost.com/equipment and that'll take you through all of our equipment reviews and guides. Final thing, I'll just reiterate the link to the Startup blog post, which will give you all of this detail, every single step, all of the links I've mentioned throughout this entire video. It's over at thepodcasthost.com/start. And if you made it through this video, congratulations, because it's been a long one. Thank you for watching along. I hope we've helped you at least make a couple of steps towards launching your podcast, if not getting it actually out into the world. Hopefully we've made you do that. If you have, please do pop a comment in below. Comment and let me know what stage you've got to, what your progress is. I'd love to hear more about anybody that puts this all into action and gets their podcast out into the world. Until then, good luck with it all and enjoy your podcasting.